When Queen Camilla leaned in to speak to Princess Charlotte, she had no idea that Catherine was watching. What happened in that moment would quietly shift the dynamic within the royal household. The day had begun like many spring weekends on the royal calendar, precisely scheduled, filled with tradition, and set against the timeless backdrop of Windsor Castle. But from the start, something didn't sit right with Princess Catherine. Over the years, she had learned to trust her instincts, especially when it came to her children. Charlotte had been unusually quiet that morning. Not upset, not defiant, just distant. She wasn't her usual curious, animated self. Instead, she seemed to fade into the background, almost as if she didn't want to be seen. That alone was enough to raise red flags in Catherine's mind. The occasion was a private luncheon at Windsor Castle, held in honor of one of Queen Camilla's recent charitable patronages. These gatherings were routine, often bringing together multiple generations of the royal family, Camilla's circle, Catherine's side, and various extended royals who didn't always blend easily, while Prince William could afford to relax into his role. Catherine remained ever watchful. She knew how easily moments could be misread or mishandled, especially where her children were concerned. That afternoon, Charlotte had been seated with her younger cousins in one of the side salons, a semi-formal setup intended to keep the children entertained with tea, games, and conversation, while the adults mingled in the grand hall. Catherine had personally helped Charlotte into her seat, kissed her on the forehead, and offered a warm glance before stepping away. Nothing seemed amiss, but roughly 45 minutes later, something changed. As Catherine spoke with a senior courtier, she caught a glimpse of Charlotte walking past an open doorway across the corridor. Her daughter wasn't crying, but her face was pale, her lips drawn into a tight line. She looked wounded, like someone who had just been embarrassed or scolded in a way that cut deep. Catherine immediately excused herself and followed. She found Charlotte standing alone at the far end of the hallway near a service entrance. Her hands were folded in front of her, her eyes fixed on the floor. "What happened, darling?" Catherine asked gently. Charlotte hesitated. "Nothing, Mummy," she replied, barely above a whisper. Catherine knelt down so their eyes met. "Sweetheart, I can always tell when something's wrong." Charlotte's eyes glistened. "Granny Camilla said I was showing off," she murmured. "She told me not to speak unless I was spoken to." Catherine blinked. "When did she say that?" "When I told Louis the answer to a question," Charlotte said quietly. "We were just playing a guessing game. But she got annoyed." Catherine didn't respond right away. She simply wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her close. Whatever came next. One thing was certain. This small moment hadn't gone unnoticed, and it would not be forgotten. Catherine pulled Charlotte into a warm, steady embrace. On the surface, she remained calm. But inside, everything had shifted. For years, she'd done her best to maintain peace, with Camilla's relationship often marked by formality and forced politeness. Camilla had her own ideas about royal protocol, especially when it came to hierarchy and behavior. Most of the time, she masked her opinions with smiles and subtle comments, but her tone occasionally revealed more than she intended. Until now, Catherine had assumed those sharp edges would never be turned on her children. She was wrong. Later that day, the family strolled through the castle gardens. Catherine stayed close to Charlotte, while Camilla walked ahead with King Charles, chatting casually as though the morning had passed without incident. Catherine watched her closely, not just because of what Camilla had said, but because Charlotte had clearly felt the need to retreat and hide. That, more than anything, unsettled her. After the walk, the family regrouped inside for afternoon refreshments. Catherine kept a quiet watch over the room. Then it happened again. Charlotte reached for a second scone at the serving table. Camilla turned, gave a small smile, and said, "Perhaps one is enough, darling. We don't want to appear greedy." It was subtle but unmistakable. A single comment might have been overlooked. But this wasn't isolated. Catherine recognized a pattern. These weren't random moments. They were consistent. Quiet attempts to diminish Charlotte. Not cruel enough to make headlines, but just sharp enough to leave a mark. Catherine didn't react right away. She wasn't one to cause a scene. But her silence was never passive, was measured. And now, she had seen enough to stop staying silent. Prince William hadn't noticed. He'd been deep in conversation with his father and senior aides. But Catherine knew she would speak to him that night, not as a duchess, but as a mother. Before that conversation could happen, though, one final moment changed everything. After tea, the adults moved to one of the castle's sitting rooms. Tradition carried over from the late Queen's era. The children were allowed in briefly before being taken upstairs by their nannies. Charlotte entered with George and Louis, her face neutral. She found a seat near the fireplace and quietly flipped through a book. Camilla entered moments later, a glass of water in hand, chatting lightly with a longtime aide. She gave the children a brief smile and turned back toward the adults. The room was relaxed until Charlotte's soft voice broke the hum of conversation. "May I play the piano for a bit?" she asked politely. Camilla glanced over her shoulder. "The piano?" as Charlotte said, hopeful. "Just quietly." Camilla sipped her water, then looked directly at her. "Darling, that's not necessary. Let the grown-ups enjoy some peace. Why don't you sit still like a proper young lady?" The words weren't loud, but they stung. The tone was cool, dismissive. Charlotte's cheeks flushed. She closed her book and folded her hands in her lap, embarrassed. Catherine had heard every word. She had been speaking with Lady Lansdowne across the room. Her gaze shifted to Charlotte's hand, then to Camilla, said nothing. But her stare lingered. Camilla noticed. Their eyes met just for a second, for Camilla looked away. The conversation in the room resumed, but the air had changed. That evening, back at Adelaide Cottage, the house was calm. George was asleep. William was finishing a call in his study. Catherine tucked Charlotte into bed herself. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she asked gently, "Did you feel upset today?" Charlotte hesitated a little. "But I'm okay. You don't have to pretend," Catherine said softly. Charlotte looked down. "Granny Camilla doesn't like it when I talk too much." There it was. Honest, clear, undeniable. Catherine kissed her forehead, stood, and walked down the hall. William looked up as she passed the study. "Is she all right?" he asked. "She's trying to be," Catherine replied. Then, she told him everything: Charlotte's words, the subtle humiliations, the way Camilla's comments had chipped away at their daughter's confidence. She wasn't angry, she was resolute. William listened closely. His face hardened as she spoke. When she finished, he said only, "This isn't something we let slide." "I agree," Catherine replied, "but we handle it carefully." The next morning, Catherine made a quiet decision. Charlotte would stay home from her upcoming engagement, a charity garden event organized by Camilla, meant to involve several royal grandchildren. Catherine informed the staff that Charlotte had come down with a minor cold. But the truth was simpler. She wouldn't send her daughter back into a space where she didn't feel safe. Word of Charlotte's absence quickly reached Camilla, and while no one said it aloud, the message was clear. Catherine was done staying silent. Camilla didn't say much when one of her aides casually mentioned that Charlotte wouldn't be attending the charity garden event. She simply raised an eyebrow and muttered under her breath, "Probably too delicate for a little mud." Catherine heard about that too. The royal households whispered more than they admitted. The tension could have ended there. It's brushed off as another quiet insultive. Not for what happened the following weekend. It was a small, private dinner at Highgrove. King Charles had invited William and Catherine for a quiet evening, just family, a chance to reconnect and to discuss upcoming royal tours. The mood was meant to be light, even restorative. But as Catherine entered the main lounge with Charlotte, who had come only to say goodnight to her grandfather, the evening took a sharp turn. Charlotte smiled politely as she stepped into the room. "Good evening, Granny," she said. Camilla barely looked up from her chair near the fireplace. Her reply was cold. Offhand, "Are you sure you're not too tired to be here?" The jab was thinly veiled but unmistakable. Everyone in the room heard it. Catherine didn't look away. Her polite smile vanished, replaced by a calm, razor-sharp stillness. She turned to Charlotte and said with composed warmth, "Why don't you say goodnight to Grandpa and head upstairs with Anna?" Charlotte hesitated. Her eyes flicked up to her mother for reassurance. Catherine gave her a small nod. The young princess turned, hugged her grandfather, and quietly left the room with the family nanny. The door clicked shut behind them. Silence followed. Camilla took another sip of wine, then remarked under her breath, "Well, she's very sensitive, isn't she?" William froze. Charles shifted in his seat, and Catherine stepped forward. Her voice was calm, measured, but unmistakably firm. "No. She's not too sensitive. She's a child. She deserves to be spoken to with kindness." Camilla raised an eyebrow. "I didn't mean it that way. I was just surprised she's still up. It's hardly something to get upset about." Catherine didn't blink. "It's not just tonight. It's been going on for weeks. I've heard what's been said to her and, so has she." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Charles tried to interject. "Darling, perhaps we should all just—" "No," Catherine interrupted, still composed. "If it were just one comment, we'd move on. But it's not. It's a pattern. And I won't stand by while my daughter is made to feel small." Camilla looked to William, expecting him to step in. But he didn't. He stayed silent. And his silence said everything. Catherine continued, "I've tried to keep peace, because that's what's expected of me. I've held back when things didn't sit right. But this is different. It's involved Charlotte. And I will not let anyone, no matter who they are, undermine her confidence." Camilla slowly set down her glass, leaning forward. "You're reading too much into this. You always take things so seriously. Children are resilient. Catherines?" The voice didn't waver. "Children remember how they're spoken to, especially by the people who are supposed to protect them. There was no shouting, no theatrics, just quiet authority. It's the kind that comes from a mother who's drawn a line and means that." William finally spoke. "We're asking for basic respect. Charlotte hasn't done anything wrong. She's just being herself. That shouldn't be a problem." Camilla glanced at Charles. But even he didn't speak. He knew better. Catherine had drawn a boundary on. Once she did that, there was no turning back. After a long silence, Catherine excused herself and left the room. William followed shortly after. Upstairs at Highgrove, Catherine sat by Charlotte's bedside. This time, she didn't ask what was wrong. She just held her daughter's hand. "You did nothing wrong," she said softly. "You were polite. Were kind. That's all I'll ever ask of you." Charlotte looked up at her. "I tried to be." "You don't have to try to be perfect," Catherine said gently. "You just have to be you." Downstairs, Charles tried to shift the evening. Back to lighter conversation. Camilla stayed mostly silent. She didn't apologize, but she didn't defend herself again either. Later that night, back at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine and William spoke quietly in their room. "She doesn't have to like me," Catherine said, her voice tired but firm. "But she will treat Charlotte with respect. It's non-negotiable." William nodded. "She will, because we're not letting this continue." The days that followed were civil but different. At Charlotte's school recital at Lambrook, Catherine made a decision. Only immediate family would be invited. Camilla was not included. The palace called it a scheduling conflict. But those behind palace walls knew what it meant. The public saw nothing unusual. Smiling photos were released as always, royal unity carefully maintained for the cameras. But inside the family, a shift had taken place. Camilla still appeared at major events, but her distance from Charlotte was noticeable. The glances, the jabs at least when Catherine was near, vanished, because Catherine had drawn the line. And that line would not be crossed again. Even in a family built on centuries of hierarchy and unspoken deference, some boundaries couldn't be crossed without consequence. Camilla had taken the warning, but she hadn't forgotten it. And the next family gathering, set against the rolling hills and heather of Balmoral, would quietly push things to the edge. Balmoral had always been King Charles's sanctuary, a place for fresh air, long walks, and life without the constant flash of cameras. It had been the late Queen's favorite retreat, and the family still followed her rhythms there. Every summer, they gathered, was tradition, a symbol of continuity. But this year, the air felt different. Catherine had agreed to come, but on her terms. She and William brought all 3 children, as expected. But Catherine had made one thing clear. She wouldn't leave Charlotte alone. Not again. Not even for a moment. The family arrived in waves. Charles was the first to greet them, cheerful and affectionate. He adored his grandchildren and looked forward to the simple joys Balmoral offered. Camilla arrived a day later, flanked by aides in her carefully curated wardrobe. Since the confrontation at Highgrove, she had remained quiet, no direct words exchanged with Catherine. Just cold pleasantries at public engagements. Everyone pretended as if nothing had happened. The first few days passed peacefully. Long walks through the woods, horseback rides, warm fires, and shared meals filled with laughter. Catherine watched Charlotte slowly return to herself, chatty at breakfast, playful in the garden, even baking scones with the kitchen staff one sunny afternoon. The quiet girl who once shrank into corners was beginning to bloom again. Then came the moment Catherine was in the drawing room with Lady Sarah Chatto and a few aides. William had gone fishing with Charles. The children were in the garden, under the watch of 2 staff members. It was the first time since arriving that Catherine had let her guard down even for 5 minutes. Then, Nade leaned in and said quietly, "I believe Princess Charlotte is in the sunroom." With Her Majesty. Catherine's posture stiffened. She didn't speak. She didn't hesitate. She simply stood, excused herself, and walked briskly down the corridor toward the sunroom. As she neared the door, voices drifted out, Camilla's and Charlotte's. "We don't always need to speak over others," Charlotte Camilla said, her tone edged in condescension. "It's important to listen. Sometimes your mummy forgets that too." Catherine's hand rested on the door handle. Then she pushed it open. Camilla looked up, surprised. "There you are," she said, still trying to sound light. Catherine's expression didn't shift. "I was looking for you, darling," she said to Charlotte. The young princess stood and walked immediately to her mother's side. "I was just having a word," Camilla said with a faint, practiced smile. "I heard," Catherine replied. Camilla raised an eyebrow. She was only being a child," Catherine said, voice cool and even. "And she doesn't need to be corrected for it every time she opens her mouth." Camilla folded her arms. "I've raised children, you know. I can tell when a girl's growing too fast for her own good." "She's growing up just fine," Catherine replied, her voice steely. "She'll do so without being made to feel like a problem." There was no yelling, no drama, just a line, drawn sharply and without apology. "I'd like a bit more kindness around her," Catherine added. "That shouldn't be too much to ask." Camilla didn't respond. Her silence was strategic. Catherine no longer cared. She had spent years protecting the institution. Her priority had shifted, protecting her daughter. In the hallway, outside, Catherine knelt beside Charlotte and whispered, "You did nothing wrong." Charlotte nodded, eyes watery. "You never need to be afraid to speak," Catherine said gently. "Not ever." By the end of that week, palace staff noticed something had changed. At meals, Camilla sat farther from the children. She no longer commented on their behavior, their clothes, or their voices. It was subtle. But in royal circles, subtlety meant everything. Catherine hadn't created a scandal. She hadn't gone to the press. But the message was unmistakable. Even Charles, ever the peacemaker, knew not to step in again. He loved both women. But he understood something crucial now. When Catherine drew a line, it wasn't out of pride, it was out of principle. And she didn't back down. The summer ended with the usual photographs, smiling faces on the castle steps. Waves, 2 well-wishers, perfect for the press. But behind those polished images, something real had changed. Camilla had lost something she never realized she was losing: Catherine's willingness to endure for the sake of appearances. That patience was gone. And while the world saw a united royal family, Behind palace doors, one mother had made sure her daughter would never be made to feel small. Again, share your thoughts in the comment section below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also click the following video shown on your screen.